स्टार्ट कर दिया? हाँ. कहाँ? Good morning, friends. We come to another chapter of gastrointestinal diseases, and today we are going to talk to you about cholera, a disease which has been rampaging through our country from time immemorial, and we have managed to get a semblance of control now over it. Otherwise, it was a common feature that we used to have Kumbh Melas, and the Kumbh Melas were associated with a huge amount of cholera outbreaks. This is a standard thing right from the time that India was known to have Kumbh Melas. So, Bengal and the Kumbh Mela, these were supposed to be places where huge amount of cholera cases used to occur. So, cholera is an acute diarrheal disease caused by Vibrio cholera, which is a gram-negative organism, and is responsible for 5 to 10% of all acute diarrheal diseases. There's profuse, painless, watery diarrhea, followed by vomiting, rapid dehydration, and suppression of urine. Because person goes into dehydration, there's less urine, leading to hypovolemic shock and death. Now, the classical diarrhea in cases of cholera was pea soup, stool, and vomitus, which was almost projectile in nature. Remember, projectile vomiting is a classical feature of increased cranial tension. But you used to have effortless vomiting, not projectile, you can say effortless vomiting, which is there in case of diarrhea. Typically a colorless watery fluid with flecks of mucus called as, not pea soup, pea soup is in typhoid, rice water stools, typically called as rice water stools. Composition was bicarbonate rich, isotonic, electrolyte solution with little protein. Now, the clinical features result from massive loss of fluid and electrolytes, and in treated cases last for about 4 to 6 days, during which the patient may pass a lot of volume of fluid, which is almost equivalent to twice his body weight. So it's a huge amount of fluid which used to pass. It just keep on passing. Actually, when you start looking at, go and see pictures which are there, go on the net and see pictures of cholera bed. A cholera bed was a bed which was made, which had, the patient was placed without his undergarments, and it had a hole at the location of the buttocks so that the person could pass his stool right on the bed, because he did not have enough strength to get up to go and go to the toilet. So that was the amount of evacuation which used to take place. Case fatality in severe cases was 30 to 40%, and most severe cases that occurred in 24 hours. This was classical cholera. We'll talk about what's the difference between classical cholera and today's cholera, which is there. The cholera can occur in all forms. You can have sporadic, endemic, epidemic, or pandemic. Epidemics are abrupt and frequent, and strike adults as well as children, and the potential is to spread fast and cause death. These epidemics are generally self-limiting. You have a peak and then it gradually subsides, depending as the force of the infection declines. You see, basically what the force of the infection was, where there was a large congregation of people with poor hygiene, with the water being contaminated, single source of infection possibly, mostly it used to be a single source of infection. So when these people, like I was saying, people used to come to the Kumbh Mela, develop the disease. When they used to go back to their homes which had better water supply, better this thing, they used to possibly be better. Self-limiting due to temporary immunity in subclinical cases. India, specifically the delta area of Ganges and Brahmaputra, as I said, Kumbh Mela and Bengal, was the homeland of cholera. Till the 19th century, it was confined only to India. So India used to have cholera such a lot. Spread to the Western countries from India. India may not be good at exporting other things, but they were good at exporting these things. So they exported cholera also to the West. So if you look at the various pandemics which were there, 1817 to 1823, started India. 1829 to 1851, India, all right through. We do not know what was the pathogen which was there. It was cholera, but we do not know which pathogen because the subtypes were not made out earlier. So later on we came to know that in 1881 we came to know that classical cholera was responsible for 1881 and the 1899, the 5th and the 6th pandemics which are there. The 7th pandemic, there was a large gap from 1923 to 1961. There was a large gap, and then we had another epidemic which started from Sulawesi, and this was again Vibrio cholera 1 L-tor. So then from 1992 we had another outbreak which started off from Chennai, earlier called Madras, and from Chennai, and this outbreak was Vibrio cholera 0139, which is the current strain which is there all over the world. Initially, okay, so this we have already talked about. First case in London was in February 1832. 6 pandemics have occurred. India, Bangladesh, basically maximum cases. Pathogen was identified during the 5th pandemic by Robert Koch as 01 Vibrio cholera classical. After the 6th pandemic, there was silence for about 40 years, as I showed you. The 7th pandemic was Sulawesi. It was the first pandemic which originated outside India, reached India in 1964, and caused by L-tor biotype. 5th and 6th and 7th, we've already talked about this. New pandemic started, 0139 started in Chennai. 8th pandemic, as you can call it, which is there, is 1992 from Chennai, which is there. So what is it? 0139 is a capsulated organism, and vaccine against 01 could not protect against 0139. We had a vaccine. It was a poor vaccine because the immunogenicity was approximately over 40 to 50%. Even then, it used to not protect against 0139. So there is no natural antibody in the human population, and after some time we noticed that L-tor gained dominance over the classical. So this is how it traveled. We had this particular area we had the 0139 traveling. So at present it is endemic in India, Bangladesh. Not very much. I am trying to cover it as fast as possible because cholera today is not so great a problem as what it used to be earlier. Seasonal fluctuations takes place, and basically it is the L-tor biotype which you get. In the inter-epidemic period, you got long-term carriers, subclinical cases, and the organism remains in the environment in free-living condition in altered form for quite some time. In 2017, we had a total of 2,27,391 cases worldwide and 5,654 deaths. So, what are the agent, host, and environmental factors? The agent, as you know, you have studied microbiology, the Vibrio cholera, rigid curved rods, first discovered by Robert Koch. Yeah, you've got these organisms here, and motile by a single polar flagellum. I'm sure you did the hanging preparation when you were in microbiology. Facultative aerobic and causes acute diarrhea with mucus flakes. Gives a fission stream appearance. Two serotypes, O1 and non-O1. O1 serotype is the most common, was the most common. Now at the present O139 is the one which is most common. So we have got three serotypes of them, Ogawa, Inaba and Ecochima. It is susceptible to heat drying, resists high alkalinity, killed within 30 minutes by boiling at 56 degrees. The Eltor variety, which is the current variety, lasts longer than the classical variety. Now there is another benefit of our waters becoming very polluted. Excessively polluted Ganges has not been, the organisms are not surviving in that water. This is one way of ensuring that cholera does not take place. Clean water, the organism survives for up to 30 days, and survival is dependent on the pH temperature and the salinity of the water. Disinfectants, it is very much susceptible to common disinfectants, so coal tar, cresol, bleaching powder, all these things. It is Eltor is a little bit more resistant, but as such, disinfectants kill this bacilli. Once it comes into the lumen of the intestine, it produces a powerful exotoxin, and the toxin produces diarrhea affecting the adrenal cyclic AMP pump, and this will create problems, and so this will result in a huge amount of fluid coming out of into the intestinal cavity. What is the difference between classical and Eltor? Also, you have learnt in microbiology. Eltor, like agglutinase, chicken, sheep, and erythrites, is resistant to classical phage 4, resistant to polymyxin B, and VP hemolysis is positive. The reservoir of the infection is the human being, and it may be a case or a carrier. So the ratio of severe cases to mild cases is 1:5. In Eltor, 1:25 to 1:100. Mild cases are the ones who maintain the endemic reservoir. Source of infection is cholera stools and vomitus, and the number of vibrios per ml of stool in cases is 10⁻⁷ to 10⁻⁹, while in carriers is 10⁻² to 10⁵. So you have still quite a large number of vibrio even in carriers in the stool. Patients, as you said, on an average 10 to 20 liters of fluid they excrete. They can, as I said, excrete as much as twice their body weight. Cholera is dose related, so the infective dose is generally around 10⁻11 organisms. An infection is through ingestion of more than an infective dose. Vibrios are susceptible to acid, so generally if your acid content of your stomach is good, they should not go, you should not develop the disease because you consume the fluid, it gets killed in the with the gastric juices. But those people who have a decreased amount of acidity or achlorhydria, the infection is more. Period of communicability is 7 to 10 days. Convalescent carriers, the infection remains for 2 to 3 weeks, while chronic carriers is up to 10 years. So a person can remain as a carrier, just like in typhoid, which we'll talk about later. This patient can continue to be a chronic carrier. Chronic carrier is less in classical, more often in Eltor, which is the current variety. What are these carriers? Carriers are an apparently healthy person excreting the vibrios, classical or Eltor in stools, and responsible for maintenance of the organism. They excrete less number of organisms than cases. What are the different types of carriers? Preclinical, convalescent, contact, or chronic carriers. The preclinical carriers is before the patient develops the disease, so 1 to 5 days duration. And convalescent carriers is after the person has been treated. He can continue to excrete the virus for 2 to 3 weeks. And in patients who are resistant to antibiotics or who have not been given antibiotic treatment, they can have these carrier state. Contact or healthy carriers, you come in contact with a case of cholera, your subclinical case, but continue to have no symptoms, but excrete the virus in stools. Chronic carriers, infrequently, doesn't occur so often. Longest carriers have been known for 10 years, basically reside in the gallbladder. What are the host factors? Ages and both sexes are involved. Endemic areas, in endemic areas, it is children who get more infected possibly because the adults have had a subclinical infection and are resistant. Gastric acidity, as we said, if the gastric acid is there, you will get destroyed, but your acid production is less. Population mobility, whenever there is mobility, there is decreased amount of sanitation, there is increased contamination, so you have chances of infection. Higher the socio-economic group, less will be the cases. Socio-economic poor hygiene, you will have problems. Immunity, natural infection, effective, there may be a local immunity and a general immunity. Local immunity will be formed once the person gets the bacilli in the intestine, may get a local intestinal immunity, and vaccination may result in temporary and partial immunity, or maybe longer immunity. Environmental factors: poor environmental sanitation, personal hygiene, as I mentioned. Lack of health education, very important, because if a person is not aware how the disease is transmitted, it is very likely that he will go into conditions which have poor sanitation, you will not take water from good sources and then get the disease. Poor quality of life, habits favor water and soil pollution, then you get more. Mode of transmission, either fecally contaminated water, contaminated food and drinks, or direct contact. So what happens once it comes into the small intestine? There's chemotaxis, and the proteases like hemagglutinin, etc., they cleave the mucus, and fibronectin adheres to the epithelial cells, and then you have the production of cholera toxin, chlorogen, and enterotoxin. Majority, that is 90% of cases, are mild or asymptomatic. So you have diarrhea with or without vomiting, and the patient recovers in 1 to 3 days. 5 to 10% of cases show typical features of cholera, and these go through these stages. One is stage of evacuation, stage of collapse, and stage of recovery. Let me see if I've got slides for this. Yep. Stage of evacuation. In evacuation, what happens is the emptying of the bowel state. There's so much of fluid which is being pushed into the bowels by the body. Onset is abrupt and manifested by profuse, painless, watery diarrhea. Rice water stools. Rice water just looks like rice water, followed by vomiting. Once the evacuation cannot take place from the water, fluid collects so much that your patient vomits also. The rice water appearance with flakes of mucus, sweetish odor, composition is bicarbonated protein. Frequency can go on, it can go up to even 40 to 50 stools a day. That's the reason why we have those cholera beds where the patient was made to lie down and had to pass the stools right there because he was not fit enough to get up. And we used to get such a large number of cases at that time that it was not possible for attendants also to handle the patient. So what are the signs of dehydration? We've already spoken of it in the last class. Sunken eyes, cold clammy skin, subnormal temperature, feeble pulse, no recordable BP, loss of skin elasticity, and later a decrease in urine output. So the patient will then go into intense, he may go into cramps, he will go into circulatory failure, and then death. Cholera sicca. Now cholera sicca is an intense illness where there is loss of fluid into a dilated bowel. and the patient is not yet evacuated but kills the patient before the symptoms appear. So this is severe acute form of cholera. Now what happens in recovery? In the stage of recovery, as the patient is given antibiotic or on his own, he will then start recovering. There's a rise in BP, re-establishment of urine output, and temperature will return to normal. So what do we do for lab diagnosis? Excuse me, we have some water. Yeah, what do you do for lab diagnosis? Lab diagnosis should be from either one of the fluids which is coming out, that is stool or vomit is. Also should be from the suspected water or food that the person has consumed. So stool sample should be a fresh sample, should be collected and should be done before the patient takes antibiotics. Now, if the patient's stool is, you cannot get the stool, I don't know, normally you will be able to get because the patient is passing so much of stool, there should be no problem in getting the stool. But if it cannot be collected, then you go put a rubber catheter or take a rectal swab and take that. But the rubber catheter doesn't pass through the anus and you can get the fluid from there. But that generally is not required because the patient is passing so much of fluid. Water also you take, we have already taught you how to take sample of water. You must ensure that the water which you take, if you're taking it from a stream, should be midstream. If you're taking from a tap, ensure the water runs for some time. Then take it in a clean container. Container should be sterilized. All those things should be done. So you take about 1 to 3 liters of suspect water in a sterile container. And or you can take 9 volumes of sample and add it to 1 volume of 10% peptone water. Now, peptone water is the carrier which you're going to take. So incubate that at 37 degrees for 6 to 8 hours and then it is sent for examination. The food collected, 1 to 3 grams of suspect food is collected in any of the transport mediums which are there. So what will you do once the sample comes to you? What do you do? First is microscopy. We've already told you that we have got these organisms which are motile. So you do a dark ground elimination and see for the darting motility. You can do a culture, you can do serology, and you can do biochemical tests. Let's see what all. In microscopy, you will look for dark field microscopy, shooting stars in the dark sky. That's what you will see. If the motility mixes on, if it ceases on the mixing of polyvalent anti-cholera diagnostic serum, then the organisms are definitely Vibrios. For culture can be done first into transport, then the culture is done and then the characterization. So what are the transport mediums which can use is VR medium and carrier medium which are used for transportation. You have to take them in a McCartney's bottle of 30 ml capacity and 10 ml of the holding medium is sufficient for 1 gram of stool. If transport medium is not available, then you take a rectal swab, dip it in this liquid which is stool liquid and keep it in a plastic bag, seal it and send it. We can also transport it in some enrichment medium which are there. Some of the enrichment medium which are there are Monsour's, taurocolate, tellurite, peptone water and alkaline peptone water. Both these things can be used as enrichment media for transportation. On arrival in the lab, the specimen which are there in transport medium is shaken and then 0.5 to 1 ml is inoculated in the enrichment medium, which I mentioned, Monsour's, taurocolate, which is there. Monsour's, taurocolate, tellurite, peptone water or alkaline peptone water. This enrichment media are incubated for 37 degrees for 4 to 6 hours and after incubation is subcultured or put into plating media. Which are the plating media which we use? We use alkaline bile salt agar or chloroproethylot, which is there. These are incubated overnight and growth is seen under a light illumination. Colonies which are there will be translucent, moist, raised, smooth and easily emulsifiable colonies before about 1 millimeter in diameter, and these are then tested for gram staining and motility. Then the serology is done. In serology we do a slide agglutination test with the suspected colonies and then add a drop of polyvalent anti-cholera diagnostic serum to neutralize it. Now serology which is helpful in assessing the prevalence of cholera in any area, and as I mean there are different types of serological tests. One is the agglutination test, one is indirect hemagglutination, and one is the complement dependent virucidal test. Biologically you can have these colonies fermenting mannose, sucrose or arabinose. Vibrio cholera ferments mannose and sucrose by acid production, but arabinose is not fermented. Then you test for cholera red reaction, which is you take a few drops of sulfuric acid and in pepper water culture and see what's the color. With Vibrios you generally get a reddish pink color due to fermentation of nitroso-indoles. For further characterization of Vibrios, you would like to do a chick cell agglutination or a polymyxin B sensitivity, page 5 sensitivity, or BP reaction or hemolysis. All these are negative in classical biotype and positive in entomology. So it's very easy to find out what variety of cholera this is. What do you do as far as containing this disease is concerned? Let's look at all these things. Case management. First is to verify the diagnosis. In 80% of cases of cholera, you just need to do oral remediation. Prompt management of cases, the case fatality is low, 1%. Non-treated cases, case fatality may be 30 to 50%. And then you do an aggressive search for cases to initiate treatment, limit spread and trace source. It is a notifiable disease, and notifiable disease not only locally, nationally and internationally, so it's very, very important that we notify immediately. Training of health workers at all levels and how to identify and notify cases should be carried out, and the outbreak should be reported to the WHO within 24 hours by the national government. The area is declared free of cholera when twice the incubation period, 10 days, is elapsed since the death or recovery of or isolation of the last case. Now, surveillance systems have been set in place, and the surveillance and prompt reporting contribute to rapid containment of cholera epidemics. Surveillance is required to detect early the outbreak, and your risk assessment for the potential cholera outbreaks is done, and one enhances these surveillance systems whenever there is a seasonality or location, like in Kumbh Mela, you definitely have a surveillance system in place. And one should be proud of the fact that Kumbh Mela today, we do not have cases of cholera which occur. We do not have much cases. It's so well organized, one of the largest gatherings in the world, and still we manage to do things well. It's very well organized. The close collaboration between the army and the civil establishment results in Mela going off very well. Multi-sectoral approach as far as cholera is concerned is required, because basically what are you looking at? You're looking at water, sanitation and food. So in schools, public buildings, etc., you may have to take these things for treatment centers, and you'll have to have coordination with the health department, water and sanitation department, fishery and agriculture, irrigation department. So you should have a coordination sort of meeting which can coordinate between all these partners and international partners. Ensure that there is provision of safe water in the location, safe food handling practices, sanitary disposal of human waste, and personal and domestic hygiene practices are very, very important. Food handling, again, you want to reheat the food, reheat it fully, not partially. Otherwise, avoid uncooked food unless it is peeled and shelled. Wash hands before preparing or eating food. And in contaminated zones, please ensure boiling of water. A simple method for family or rural health center to dispose of cholera stools is by putting them in the pit latrine or burying them. So you don't need very big apparatuses, etc. for dealing with the cholera pandemic. You need to use your common sense and take all the material which is contaminated and push it down the drain or into a pit. As we've been mentioning in the COVID, we must ensure washing of hands. Washing hands has now become very important for control of disease. Washing of hands, there is proper disposal of excreta. Vaccination, we have 3 vaccines which are available. None of these is really very great, but we do have these 3 vaccines. And mass vaccination is it's not been carried out. The WC-RBS vaccine, which is the whole-killed Vibrio cholera 1 vaccine, with a purified recombinant B subunit of cholera. Efficacy trials have shown that this vaccine is safe and confers about 85 to 90% protection during 6 months, requiring 2 doses 1 week apart. Second variant of this has come, which does not contain the recombinant B subunit, administered in 2 doses 1 week apart, showed a protective efficacy of 66%. Now, a live attenuated genetically modified Vibrio cholera 01 vaccine is come out, and this is the one which is now generally being used, and it can be used in the single dose. That also is beneficial. I told you about the ORS last time, but I did not mention specifically about reduced osmolarity ORS, which is very important as far as diarrheal diseases, all diarrheal diseases concerned. Sodium chloride 2.6, glucose 113.5, potassium chloride 1.5, and trisodium citrate about 2.9 grams per milliliter. So what is this? What are the components? Sodium chloride and potassium chloride, which are there, basically electrolytes, provides electrolyte. Sodium bicarbonate corrects acidosis, and glucose enhances the absorption of both salt and water. And the citrate component has additional benefits, makes the product more stable. Has a direct effect of increasing intestinal absorption of sodium and water, thus results in less stool output and high output diarrheas. Therefore, the WHO recommends the ORS citrate. You give oral rehydration therapy 100 ml per kg body weight of ORS solution in the first 3 to 6 hours to correct the dehydration. If the patient is thirsty and wants to drink more, let him drink. He is not going to get overhydrated by oral fluids. Any problems which are there occur because of IV fluids. Do not, please remember, oral fluids generally do not create any problems. So, give as much. After rehydration has been achieved, continue giving ORS for replacement or ongoing losses. Plain water and home available fluids like kanji, etc. are very good. They should be used. IV fluids only for severe cases, and after the initial rehydration of the patient, severe dehydration, and also for catering to shock. We prefer to give either ringalactate or IV injection, normal saline, less effective because ringalactate has got other electrolytes. Plain glucose solution, please do not give. Please do not give plain glucose solution. You require to give either ringalactate or normal saline. IV fluids. The normal saline does not correct base acidosis or depression losses, so that's the problem today with the normal saline. Dextrose solution is unsuitable, is not effective for rehydration, correction of base acidosis, or replacement for potassium losses. So how much do you give? The quantity 30 ml per kg body weight for first 1 hour for children, older patients first 30 minutes, 70 ml per kg next 5 hours in infants and older children next 2.5 hours, 100 ml per kg 6 hours in infants and 3 hours in older children or adults. Then you reassess after this for any problems which are there. If you're giving IV, please look for overload, very important. Look for puffiness, look for shortness of breath, look for swellings. Very dangerous, patient can die. At treatment centers, ensure that frequent hand washing takes place, safe disposal of excreta and vomitus is done. Quarantine is as such not really necessary, but some places it is carried out. Strict infection control measures such as face masks, gloves or special clothing, hospital staff and visiting families is not really required. Antibiotics, we would prefer to use chlorhexidine or tetracycline, or if alternative, furazole or azole, you have erythromycin or chloroquine. Do not use corticosteroids. Do not, as far as possible, use antispasmodics. These will likely to create more problems. Blood transfusion and volume expanders are also not necessary. So now the government had come up with the Diarrheal Diseases Control Program 1980-81, and in that it had got National Cholera Control Program strategy. So this Diarrheal Diseases Control Program which is there, the basic thrust is oral rehydration therapy, and the main objective of the program is to prevent diarrhea-associated deaths in children due to dehydration. There has been a lot of training programs and health education material has been given, and we have tried to spread the message. Main thrust has been towards ORS, how ORS should be made and how home available fluids and breastfeeding should be continued. In the Child Survival and Safe Motherhood Program, districts ORS is being supplied as a part of the subcenter kits. Now, which are the programs which are associated with cholera control program? One is the National Water Supply and Sanitation, because unless and until you get good water supply, nothing good will take place. So, National Water Supply and Sanitation Program. In 1972, we had the Accelerated Rural Water Supply Program. This also is very important. So, in the rural areas, you do not have drinking water available at close locations. The Government of India has launched the International Drinking Water and Supply and Sanitation Decade from 1981 to 1991. These are all things which the government is doing. Hope that things will improve, and we will basically, with more education coming in, more health education coming in, more water supply being supplied to various people, we do have a cutting down on cholera, but we still have O139 in ourselves. Thank you.